speaking with Meghann. We talk about her journey into pregnancy at 40 years of age. She and her husband took intentional time to prepare for bringing their baby into the physical world, but even with that preparation, there was the awareness for the lack of knowledge that Meghann was missing and coming to terms with the very deep programming about pregnancy and birth in our current culture. Meghann knew what she wanted for her birth and felt that there wouldn't be a bridge for the gap of what she wanted and what was available within systemic birth. After more research of physiologic birth and reading stories of women birthing in the early 1900s and current births outside of the medical system, Meghann was able to make her own informed decisions and feel secure in the choices that she was making within this pregnancy while working with medical midwives. Meghann found a new team of women to support her in the way that she had envisioned for herself and her child, and by the time her baby was ready to be born, she was close to 43 weeks gestation. So I'm very grateful to have this story of a mother allowing her body and her baby to naturally start the birth process and not being pressured into an unnecessary induction for a baby being within the womb past 41 weeks. Have a listen to these beautiful words of Meghann's journey to birthing her daughter. Hi, Meghann. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast. I'm very, very excited to hear your story today.
Thanks so much for having me, Karma.
No worries. So I'm excited. So let's just get straight into it. So the first question that I want to ask you is, what is your ancestry and your lineage that you will be passing on to your child?
Yeah, like a lot of people in North America, I've got a lot of mix in me. My native side of me comes all from my mother, who's Haida and Kwakwaka'wakw and has some Scottish as well. And then on my dad's side, he was born in Dublin, Ireland, and then they immigrated. So I've got a lot of Irish as well that I'm obviously not that connected to because of being in Canada and kind of being raised in a small town on the Northwest Coast. But what I'd really like to share around that, I guess, is the maternal lineage, being like an eldest daughter of my mom, who's an eldest daughter of my grandmother, who's an eldest daughter of her mother. My great-grandmother's an eldest daughter. And then I think her as well. So it's myself and then Dixie Johnson, Minnie Wallace was her maiden name. And then Ruby Simeon was my great-grandmother. And she was born on Haida Gwaii. And then her mother was Martha Marks, who was also Haida. And I was born in Alert Bay, which is something that'd be fun to talk about down the road because like the same person who delivered me is who delivered my mom, which was like kind of cool. And that's totally gone now. But just in terms of all of the mixing of like bloodlines and stuff that's gone on in Haida Gwaii, they're very concerned with maternal lineage and like your placement in the society today still is based on your mother. So even though my great-grandmother married out of the culture fairly young and moved down south, and she married into the Cape Mudge band down here. So our line is kind of branched in this direction. I was able to return kind of back into that over a series of visits when I was learning to weave in my late 20s. So I was like, I had met my great-grandmother or my great-nanny quite a few times. Like she passed away when I was 12 and I think she was like 94. Yeah, I was lucky to have a lot of great grandparents alive when I was a kid. I think all four of them were around on my mom's side anyway. But yeah, just the strength of that line feels in a way like when we look at it from the mother perspective, which is so different than like the paternal line that Western society takes and like the Indian Act takes from the father. Yeah, it's a very strong line and it is important, I guess, like even though there's that disconnection that the bloodline is still strong there, rather than if it was starting to come somewhere in that line where it broke and I had like the Haida line coming from a father, it would be totally almost irrelevant in a way, because it's really amazing to see how, sorry, it's just like such a big feeling conversation, but it's really amazing to see how in contemporary like life on Haida Gwaii, like families will be split into their clans in a completely different kind of context than you see happening in the nuclear family.
Okay.
So yeah, it's very interesting, like that way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's so amazing that you know all of the women in your maternal line so back and you have their names and you're able to bring them into this conversation because a lot of people, a lot of women don't know any further than, their grandmother. So that's so amazing. And that you are the first of your daughter, or pardon, you are the first of your mother, and she's the first of her mother, and she's the first of hers. I think that's just so amazing that you've got that connection of being that eldest woman within that family line, that maternal lineage. So thank you for sharing that.
Problem.
Wow, that's so amazing. So, with that being said, I would love to ask you this next question then. Where does your motherhood journey begin?
Yeah, um I guess it begins I mean I just turned 41.
Mm.
So I got engaged, I think, when I was 37. And my partner, Mike, when he proposed, he wanted to start trying to have babies right away.
Mhm.
And I was kind of like, no, let's wait until we're married. Like, weddings are a big deal. Let's get it out of the way. And then we were married, and I was like, no, let's wait until we've like bought a house and we're settled where we want to be. And then it was like the pandemic happened, and just like time just sped by. And I was like, oh boy, okay, I'm turning like 40 soon. We should really start trying and stop waiting for things to be all in a row, all your ducks in a row or whatever. And so we got pregnant pretty quickly after we started trying, which was nice. We were quite sure on the conception date, and because there was still a lot of intention going into it, like we kind of done some nutritional preparation along the way, and also some like plant medicine ceremonies
Mhm.
just previous as well, that preparing for those, we'd stop drinking, um paying more attention to like our diet,
Yeah.
the few months leading into when we conceived, which was nice. Because yeah, we were like drinking a little bit through the pandemic, habitually, I guess, like a glass of wine, every day kind of thing, and maybe a cocktail. We got really good at making cocktails at home, and like it just like kind of snuck up on us, and it was nice to step back from that and completely cut it out after one of the journeys we went on together. It just was not resonating anymore at all. And it feels good that we had that period of kind of like sobriety leading up to conception. Um, and when we found out, I guess I I felt like it was kind of on this like not only like the lack of awareness about what I was going into. I felt like I had a huge gaps in my knowledge about what to do or how to prepare, like once I was pregnant. And like the amount of choices I was feeling confronted with really became apparent very quickly. And all of the like huge like societal expectations that we're confronted with as well, and kind of unprepared for too.
Mhm.
The pressures of how things are done normally,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
kind
it's
of
a lot. It can be very overwhelming and overstimulating.
yeah. And I think I struggled a lot early on with my own body and the changes that were happening. Um, I had like some struggles in my like teenage years, like coming to terms with being like a woman, um, and like really embracing myself and my femininity. And um, yeah, so it's having all these other like bodily changes happening to me and feeling like this kind of like gripping and wanting to control,
Mhm,
my body, and like this surrender needing to occur to like the process unfolding
mhm.
from my body. And like it's interesting. It's like it's our body, but at the same time, it feels like it's not my
Right,
body.
right.
It's like life is like taking over and like
Mm,
just roaring through you in all these different ways, and it's pretty wild.
wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. I don't know if you want to have another question for that. That's kind of like the beginning, I guess, I feel, where
Yeah, no, that's
this one
perfect.
start.
Keep going with that and talk about, if you sought prenatal care. Yeah, keep going the way you're going. It's perfect.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, because of that, I'm trying to think of where to like kind of start so it navigates in a bit of good direction because there's so much information, I guess, that
Yeah,
I'd love to share and like,
tell as much as you want. The floor is yours, so you can go into it if you want to.
yeah. Um, yeah, I guess I it's gonna take me just a second to like navigate my thinking for a minute. But I guess like I knew on the outset, like right out of it, I knew standard, like having a birth in the hospital was not what I wanted. I
Mhm,
knew that much. So it was for me, the midwifery model provided by the medical system
mhm,
was the extreme end of where I wanted to consciously go,
mhm.
or place myself in terms of involvement within the medical system. And so I did, as soon as we found out we were pregnant, and I am in Vancouver, so I know how busy it can get for everybody. So I immediately found like secured like a place with a
Right.
reputable, like, I mean, everybody says I think it was Strathcona and Pomegranate are always really talked about in high regard.
Okay.
And they have, I think Strathcona Midwifery had an Indigenous led team.
Okay.
So I requested that team, and was able to have a place there. I was kind of in the middle of them moving and their team changing over.
Okay.
So I had my first few appointments with one person and like a non-Indigenous lady who was also really great. And she'd practiced a bit on Haida Gwaii as well, which I was really drawn to. Um, and then, but then they were moving over to Pomegranate, and then they got, I think, an additional 4 new team members, like a couple of alternates, and then their core team. So that was right in the middle of my pregnancy journey. So I feel like my experience within that system is a little bit unusual
Hmm. Yeah.
compared to if it was just like really set in place.
Okay.
Um, but I did feel, I mean, there was that, and I was going to participate in whatever way and feel how it was,
Hmm.
so that my options were open. And at the same time, I had become aware of and been really a big fan of Yolanda Norris Clark and her speaking on like many topics,
Hmm.
and became aware of the Free Birth Society through that, and kind of went down this like rabbit hole on Instagram and the internet of birth stories and the incredible content that's available of women birthing at home, birthing in their own power,
Hmm.
birthing with family and friends, and support of kind of traditional birth attendants. And the only birthing I'd ever been exposed to was Hollywood births, and those depictions in movies of the
Hmm.
woman on her back screaming, and like she's all like a crazy frazzled mess, and
Yeah.
this like chaos, or the water breaking in the taxi, and
Yeah. Just
just
so.
like it's so stereotypical. And then you see these like births at home of like fully composed women standing up and like just catching their own babies, and you're like, that is like unbelievable.
Yeah.
What's so I mean, I feel like I got steered in really good directions early on, and I ended up taking um Gloria LeMay's doula training course just for my own knowledge and empowerment of feeling like I had found a person who I could place some degree of trust in, um, into their experience and their knowledge and their kind of ways I could interact with other people. Because really what I wanted, and what I knew what I wanted was, I mean, I wished, I felt this really big gap between what was available in the medical system of like these team focused ways of doing things where you're working with a number of people and you don't really know who you're going to get on the day of your birth.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted just to like build a connection with an individual and build trust and know who was going to be present.
Yeah.
And I think at one point I reached out on my social media to ask if anybody had some stories or knowledge about the way things were done on the Northwest Coast,
Okay.
because how did we manage birth and handle birth? And I ended up having a couple of good resources sent my way from different communities, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of them that was really cool was called Birth Stories of Old Masset. And it had some old birth stories of women birthing like in the early 1900s, which were very cool.
Wow.
And then, yeah, like the one was Florence Davidson, I believe. I should double check that who it was, because um, anyway, it's somebody in the early 1900s. And she had her mom attend her first 4 births, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then after her mom passed away, she birthed all of her babies on her own. And she would just go in the back room, close the door, take care of herself, and come out with a baby. And nobody even knew that she was having a baby. And
Wow.
women in the community would be like, let us know and we'll come support you. And she was just totally fine doing it on her own. And I think she had a lot of kids. Like, I'd have to reread her birth story, but she lost a number of children as like teenagers or adults.
Okay.
Um, but I feel like she had like 12 or 15 kids. Like,
Wow.
she had a lot of kids. And um but yeah, like, I mean, it wasn't called a free birth back then. It was just people just
Sure.
something they did.
Yeah, it was
um
normal.
yeah. um but yeah, and I guess I was just left feeling like in that journey and wanting to take more of the reins of it into my own hands and feel like just making sure that I felt like I was making informed choices along the way, even if I was rejecting a lot, like basically rejected almost everything
Mm-hmm.
along the way that was presented to me as an option.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that I wasn't doing it completely blindly,
Right.
that I was aware of what the advantages were and what I was saying no to,
Mm-hmm.
which gets really heavy. I mean, those choices are um, very heavy, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Yeah, they
Uh,
don't make it easy to say no to these things.
yeah, a lot of fear mongering.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
well, maybe, yeah, unfair of me to say that, but I do feel like I would leave every appointment questioning myself
mhm.
and having to reaffirm my own trust in my body and the path I was choosing.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair to say it's fear mongering because it is. They're really ramming it down your throat that the worst possible outcome will happen if you don't do A, B, or C, or it's a lot of coercive methods to kind of, trick you into doing what they want, which isn't fair. It's not nice, especially to women navigating pregnancy for their very first time. They
Yeah.
should really just be able to do whatever feels good to them, with no questions asked. If they say no to something, it should be okay. Well, here's a pamphlet if you want to read more into it, and if you change your mind, come back to us. But if not, that's fine.
Mhm. There was some of that, but it really, because of that team model, it depends who you get and their experience. And
True. Yeah. So it's kind of
Mhm.
like Russian roulette with what
Yeah.
midwife is going to be there today. Yeah.
And are they gonna, because the judgment component, and I always try to put myself in their shoes, that like some of these ladies have been registered midwives and working in birth for decades, and it's like I could see the judgment of like, I'm experienced, I'm educated, I've gone to school for this.
Mm-hmm.
This is my profession, and like you think you know better than me,
Mm-hmm.
not bitch, but like little girl or whatever. It's like
Yeah.
this kind of like hierarchical
Yeah.
view of knowledge and of authority over birth, I guess. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
yeah.
Just quickly then, so because you started getting into this journey of learning about free birth and really getting excited about this with the podcast and hearing birth stories. Was this something you were sharing with your husband at the time, or did you kind of keep this more under wraps? How did that conversation go between the two of you?
No, he's been a big part of the conversation.
Mm. Mhm.
He's been really supportive. I think he shares at first he was a little hesitant and unsure, but he very quickly got on board and trusted and probably trusted it more than I did. I had a lot of fears going into the birth
Mhm.
around my own body and old injuries.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Fear
Okay.
of death, of my own death and the death of the baby in childbirth. Like,
Yeah, totally. That's totally a normal thing to be fearful of. Absolutely.
yeah,
Mhm. Wow.
yeah. But definitely like that, um, with all the stuff I was trying to share, what I was trying to get at was my thought process was like, this is the best that our society has to offer me in terms of being a woman who's pregnant. It's pretty sad
Mhm.
state of things. And that birth and death both seem like very mishandled things with very limited options available to us in this world. And I'm very appreciative of the movements that are happening and the level of awareness and education that's being generated.
Mhm.
I'm honestly surprised it's not more attacked, what's going on by the medical establishment and by the media, because it is so powerful.
Mhm.
Uh, there's so much that seems like it's taken from women and from children in regular birthing practices. And I haven't even seen any of it up close, but reading about it and hearing stories,
Mhm.
and then having had a child now, I think it's devastating, like kind of the state of things, during that course, like the C-section rate, I think is up over 40% now in the lower mainland.
Yeah.
And like every single person that you talk to that's had one, because I was kind of watching, like there was my peers who are pregnant and excited, some of them indigenous, and really excited to embrace like cultural ways of doing things in the birth space, but also traveling in tandem with midwifery models through the
Mm.
medical system. And like every single one of them, except for one now, resulted in C-sections.
Oh God.
And just like what is going wrong, and everybody, I don't know all of their stories in detail, but like all of them, everybody who comes out of it believes that it was necessary.
Mhm.
So it's so hard to know how to talk about in a respectful way.
Yeah.
That's not kind of placing my own judgments on top of what a woman has been through.
Mhm. Totally.
But it's also, it feels like that system is designed to steer you in a direction. Like it's like sabotage of
Mhm.
like the natural processes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very slippery slope once you get in there, and then it usually ends in a cesarean and having your baby cut out of you, which is so unfortunate for so many women because there's so many mothers out there that have had cesareans or repeat cesareans and they were completely unnecessary. And
Mhm.
like you said, yeah, it is hard to broach that subject um without knowing the full story. But even if you know the full story, it's a really big pain point for a lot of women, to get into that. So you have to really ease into that conversation and still hold the love for them for what they experienced. um, but it is also one of those things where it's like, yes, this did happen to you, but I wonder if you were supported in a different way, in a more loving, caring, compassionate way, would that have even happened?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a big, big conversation.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, and I guess should I keep going and like share the full birth story then? Because it's kind
Yeah.
of like the pre, and just to kind of like without going too much, but basically I ended up through that pregnancy journey. I didn't have like a dating ultrasound or any ultrasounds along the way. It was an extremely healthy pregnancy. Like
Mhm.
a So that was a lot of trust in that.
Mhm.
I did do, I think, because I went so far over, I went to almost 43 weeks. Um, I think in that last week they wanted to like listen for the heart accelerations, and I
Mm.
let them use like the manual one, not the Doppler, but like they listened with just the regular, that wooden, what they call
Oh,
it.
the Pinard horn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, those. And that was good too. They like, I mean, it was perfect. Like it was all just good the whole way through. So
Mm-hmm.
lots of like fluid in there. She was like moving around lots and sloshing around with the amniotic fluid and everything. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, I did consider doing acupuncture right near the end. I think on the Friday I had made an appointment and then I called and canceled it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to try, yeah, because I was like, oh, maybe I'll try like a natural way of doing like just kind of nudge it. But then I ended up not doing that. And I think the next day we actually went to go visit Crystal Works Gallery on Burrard and Third, I think it is.
Okay.
It's this incredible gallery of like crystals owned by like this mom and her two daughters. And it's got like, 3 or 4 foot high stones and they're just like beautiful. And I love going in there and just looking at them. And
Mm-hmm.
we ended up talking with those ladies and they had worked with a woman named Melody, and I have one of her books, but it's called Laying On of Stones, where they do like crystal grids. And I
Mm-hmm.
asked one of the sisters because they have her big book, and then they have a hell. So when she was alive, they had a bunch of classes with her that they ran to teach you how to do it. And I've never really done it, but I was asking about that. And then when we left, I actually had the first contractions. Was like going over the Broad Street Bridge, and I was like, oh, that's like um cool. And they kind of lasted through the night and like, just a few hours or whatever and stopped. And then I think it was, yeah, it was 1 a.m. they started again.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm trying to remember. Maybe it was the Sunday. Maybe they were gone completely the next day. I'm having a hard time remembering
Oh,
what the days were. Um, but anyway, so I messaged that lady and she actually found me a crystal grid, which we set up that night. Um, it must have been that night. So we set that up
mm-hmm.
on my like fireplace. It's like a really big, deep one. So we
Yeah.
put it up there so it was like undisturbed. And I had placed like this kind of like a bear stone figure at the start of the grid because it goes in like a direction and then there's like a little photo of you. It's like kind of like voodoo-y
Okay.
vibe.
Cool.
So you can do it with the living person like in the center of this like giant grid if you've got a big room, but you can also just use like a little photograph of yourself. And it was a specific one to birthing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that had any role in how my birth unfolded or not, but I do recall, and the birth person who was there thought it was hilarious because when I got in the birthing pool, I had just like had from like 1 a.m. that night until I think it was around like 3 or maybe 3 o'clock when I got in the tub
Mm-hmm.
in the afternoon. So it had just gone like there was one little break around 4:30 where I slept for a half hour, but it was pretty continuous,
Mm-hmm.
like and aggressive contractions
Okay.
all the time.
Right.
And it just like it wouldn't let up. And there was like no time and space for much else, I felt.
Mm-hmm.
They were very intense. And
Can I just interrupt for a quick second? Because you said you
yeah.
had a birth person there with you. So I'm assuming then that you quit with the registered midwives and chose to go with traditional birth support for the actual birth.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I should share that too. Yeah, it was through Gloria's class that she put me in touch with a lady who attends births that's been doing it for like 40 years too.
Mm-hmm.
And she came to my home, I think it was 2 months prior to birth. She came once a week
Mm-hmm.
for support. And yeah, I called her in the morning of the birth. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to do
Mm-hmm.
about the midwifery care.
Okay.
Um, but I didn't end up calling them. It felt unnecessary and everything happened just so fast, feeling so fast anyway, even though it was quite a long birth. But
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, so she came around, I think 10 a.m. she arrived. Um, and yeah, what else? I was just switching between the bathtub and the couch a bunch and just like I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, and just like screaming around, swearing, and like at one point I probably almost had a panic attack. I was like, I really can't do this.
Mhm.
So people say not to use the word pain, but I found it incredibly painful, or like to call it birthing sensations
Mm.
instead of pain or contractions or but that like lower abdomen, that like, is it pushing all the muscles pulling up to create the piston effect going down at the end of like the fetal ejection reflex, like,
Mhm.
oh my God, like real painful.
Mhm.
Um and yeah, I think at one point I asked my husband to come in the birthing pool with me, and it was dark by then.
Mhm.
And oh yeah, but when I got in the pool, I was like, take that take that bare stone down off there, because I was convinced that like it was so, I was like, I just need a break. I'm so exhausted. And I figured that had part of something to do with it anyway. And um later the birth worker was like, thought it was hilarious and like really out of the blue, like just some weird thing.
Mhm.
um but yeah, there were some moments in there. I guess I had kind of fallen into a bit of a rhythm and like breathing techniques, and less like it felt like it was happening to me, and more that I was kind of moving with the sensations and able to manage them.
Mhm.
I'd gotten into this little routine with them, I guess, of techniques that were working, like the O shape with the
Okay.
mouth was really effective for me.
Mhm.
Um, I had like a rubber spatula that I was biting, which was kind of funny. Um, and I was kind of, resting my head on the edge of the tub a bunch. And yeah, I think, and then Madison actually was somebody who I had hoped to work with, and my birth fell in the month of August. I was due August 9th, I think, and she was on away the entire month.
Okay.
And I think she had just arrived back in Vancouver, and I still hadn't given birth. So I reached out and let her know I
Mhm.
was still pregnant, and if it happened, could could we call her for additional support?
Mhm.
Um, and so she ended up coming. I think she came probably at like maybe 9 o'clock at night.
Okay.
She did some drumming and singing, burned some sweetgrass and sage, and me and Mike were both like pretty amazed that that laid along, like we even felt it when the birth worker came, because we had kind of gotten into our own rhythm
Yeah.
through those hours together, and felt like we were okay together, and then somebody new coming in the space, even though we had familiarity and trust and comfort with
Mhm.
her going into it, it was still that entrance of a new energy into the birthing space
Mhm.
was an adjustment
Yeah.
that happened pretty quick. And then we had a great thing, the three of us. Oh, and my mom came too. I had my mom and my grandma waiting
Oh,
here
wow.
for the 3 weeks prior to birth to be a part of the birthing process. So my grandma wasn't there because she ended up getting COVID right before. So she had left the space. But my mom was there. She came around 3 o'clock.
Mhm.
And so there was us. And then we were all amazed, though, that when Madison entered the space, like really far into it, with so much grace,
Mhm.
um, and like a gentle entrance, but like a really powerful presence.
Mhm.
And yeah, I feel like what she brought to the space was really important and really sacred and really special.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Very grateful. It
Mhm.
could be my own bias, having seen and heard people who've worked with her have these incredible birth stories,
Yeah.
that I had a lot of trust in her as well.
Yeah, I totally believe it. She's a wonderful woman and
Yeah.
she lives and breathes her work in such a beautiful way. Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so there was a lot of purging. I mean, my whole pregnancy, I had kind of morning sickness almost the whole way through.
Wow.
Um, but during the birthing time as well, there was tons of purging from probably like, early in the morning and right until baby was born. So I was getting a bit worried myself. I had some birth, drinks going to
Mhm.
stay hydrated, but it was pretty violent purging in the nighttime and not a lot to come up anymore.
Mhm.
There was definitely like a lot of, I feel, healing that occurred between me and my mother, having her there.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I think near the end, I'd gotten into that routine, and then Madison said, maybe try getting more vertical because I was a bit more hunched over during every contraction. And she's like, try standing up. And I couldn't do that, but I got on my knees and, spread my legs a little bit. And I was hanging off of Mike's shoulders, like my arms around his neck through contractions. And, he was like, you got this. And she I had a lot of like worries about my hips because of all these like pelvis issues. But when she came, I had the birth attendant. She was trying to get me to feel if I could feel the head, but I got her to use like a mirror instead,
Mhm.
because I just didn't feel comfortable
Yeah.
reaching down and around my belly.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I could feel her crowning, and feel her kind of retreating back up.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but they were like, what happened now? It was like could feel her there, and I think they said like when you feel her crowning, like don't push, you
Mhm.
know? So it's like don't push. And like there was this incredible moment that really stands out of the support of the woman in the room leading me through essentially like breathing exercises,
Mhm. Yeah.
um to like hold her back from coming out too soon. And then so we waited that one contraction, I think, with her kind of stretching me, and then her head came out, and then held her again for another contraction, and then the next one, her whole body just flopped out,
Wow.
and the birth attendant was like, "Pick up your baby, Meghann." And I turned around and like she kind of handed her to me and brought her over, and we didn't know if it was a girl or a boy. So at first I was confused by the umbilical cord because it was kind of pulling a little bit, and I was like, "What is that?" And I didn't understand really what was going on. And but it was just like, her arms were outstretched,
Yeah.
like she came out of the water, arms were outstretched, and her eyes were open, and
Mhm.
she let out this beautiful like wah, wah, like these like really stereotypical baby cries. And it was just there was no like she wasn't any other color. She was just skin color. There was no vernix left because she was so old. She had a perfect French manicure, her nails like perfect manicure. It was bizarre. And little, brown hair, and
Mhm.
being older mom, when she came out, and she was just this like all her toes, all of her fingers, all like just everything. She's just like
Mhm.
perfect little baby. And
Mhm.
um it was just any hesitation I had about like I'm gonna be this age when she's 10 years old, or I'm gonna be this age when she graduates, or like, does whatever, it would just all disappeared, and was like, it's gonna be so good.
Yeah.
She's amazing, and it's gonna be wonderful.
Mhm.
And just so happy. I
Oh,
felt so happy to see her, and now to like live with her and be her mom, and like know that I did everything in my power to protect her, and
absolutely.
to give her that space and the trust in her that she knows when to be born, she knows what she's doing. And like from
Mhm.
her perspective, to like I found a lot of strength in my fears in the
Mhm.
pregnancy, to be like, from the baby's perspective, if I'm afraid of like the pain of childbirth, so to speak, like what does a baby feel like when they're going through the birth canal and having their head squeezed? And like
Mhm.
it's pretty, you take the perspective of reincarnation or souls consciously coming through the body,
Mhm.
to be here. It's a lot of bravery, I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely. Absolutely. And what was your like those immediate kind of postpartum moments, and how long did it take for your placenta to come through? And could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, well, I think my water broke close to the end because it felt like I was peeing. Um, and then uh placenta, I think it was about 35 or 40 minutes. I
Okay.
think it's written down. It was pretty like within a range. And that was okay. We did a cord burning. And then the next day we ended up cutting it because we changed our minds and wanted it to be shorter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, everything was quite wonderful, except for her first latch. When she went to nurse was on my right boob, and she like broke the like crimped it and broke the skin, so it was bleeding like from her first latch.
Oh, wow.
Um, and yeah, so it was the breastfeeding journey for quite a few months of the postpartum was, especially the first 2 weeks were, or first week, hard to say, but really, 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 really intense
Mm,
and very, even though I was aware and had done a little bit about being prepared, I was not prepared at all for what that was going to be and the hormonal fluctuations and like,
mm-hmm.
so I was quite devastated with that. I would be when the colostrum was there, and there were times when she would nurse, and it was a very painful latch for like 3 or 4 hours straight.
Okay.
Was like, sometimes I felt a bit of trauma at the time around the breastfeeding journey for sure, because there was so much pain. It was like I was afraid, the
Mm-hmm.
feeling of having this like amazing birth, but being afraid now of her coming to my boob because of
Mm-hmm.
how much it hurt,
Right.
but wanting, and it was just, yeah, it was quite sad, that part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you said that it did eventually get better as time went on? Or do you still have
Yeah.
pain as you breastfeed now?
No, it's gotten better. I was amazed with the team at Pomegranate because I didn't actually call them at all when she was born. So they were quite worried. They were like, I
Oh,
think they called me on, she was born on the Tuesday. I missed an appointment on Tuesday because I completely forgot about it.
yeah.
And then, um, but yeah, I eventually told them at the end of that week and explained, that I hadn't called them and I felt bad about it. And um, they were supportive and offered me really great postpartum support,
Oh,
which
nice.
that was nice to have.
Mm-hmm.
So they spent a couple hours with me, like with the breastfeeding stuff, which
Oh,
was nice. And then I also had a recommendation for a lactation consultant, named Shaz,
mm-hmm.
and she came at one point as well, and I ended up going mostly with her advice because I was trying to work through healing the nipple.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I used like a combination for a while of like nipple guards. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
it was a bit of a journey with the breastfeeding as
Mm-hmm.
well. So quite a lot of people involved in that journey and different layers of support.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but eventually it got better and I healed, and my milk supply was felt like very, very like a lot at
Okay.
the start, like when the milk came, because she'd been nursing so aggressively that it was
Mm-hmm.
had like some struggles with like almost mastitis and clogged ducts, and like, yeah, it was
Mm-hmm.
a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's good now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like the breastfeeding, it's in and of itself. You can prepare, for the birth experience and how you want that to go, and then you can kind of prepare and get conscious about the breastfeeding journey. But sometimes it can go one way or the other. So it's really nice to hear that you had support with the midwives that could support you, and having the lactation consultant come to you and give you support and tips and things like that. It sounds like you had a lot of really good women standing behind you in your birth and in these postpartum times to really make sure that it wasn't just you and your partner alone trying to navigate this new being and this new way of who you are. You had lots of, that help there. So that's really nice to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And my mom as well was there for the 10 days after the birth. That
Oh,
was helpful, and hearing her journey as well was
mm-hmm.
helpful.
Mm.
Um, I would say the lactation consultant we used, she was trained or worked with a lot of traditional midwives in Peru, or not Peru, sorry, in Iran.
Wow.
And a lot of her advice is very different than most consultants and what they'll tell you to do.
Okay.
But hers was, if I recall, letting her like lay directly on me and getting her step reflex going.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like the breast crawl
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was it.
Wow.
Just do that and like put her on you and let her do it. Trust her. Continue to trust was basically what she said. And yeah.
Right. Wow.
Because I think she said the problem with her, with not problem, but like that my daughter's name is Kintaway, Kinney, is her shortened version that we're using. Was she had more, her sucking needs were bigger than her nutritional needs. So, and
Oh,
that the pain was coming when Kinney had had enough milk, but she still wanted to continue to suck, but there was so much milk still in my boob that she would clamp down.
okay, yeah.
And that's where the pain would come. So,
Mm.
and her latch wasn't very deep at the start. Like as she grew, it got a bit better, but
Yeah.
basically by having her on me and that her head weight going down to
Mm.
latch, it would create a deeper latch
Okay, yeah.
for her.
Yeah, that
And
makes
then basically like take her off and like let her suck your finger instead.
okay, yeah, so that she can still have that reflex of the sucking that she wants, but not necessarily on the nipple and really creating more pain.
Mhm.
Hey, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And then may I ask, what did you do with your placenta after you had burnt it and cut it away? Did you save it? Did you tincture it or bury it or anything special that you do with your family?
We had a good referral to somebody who encapsulated it and like, dehydrated. So we, yeah, had her do that and make a tincture.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, which
Right.
is the one thing I guess I could have done that I do know people did here on the Northwest Coast was they bury it.
Hmm.
Here is the tradition, but I
Hmm.
didn't do that.
Fine, you do
Like,
it.
I want that placenta back in my bod.
Exactly. Yeah, I think
It's,
it's lovely the encapsulation and the tinctures of placentas. That's such a cool, it's such a great
yeah.
idea.
I feel like it made a really big difference too in my postpartum
Okay.
because when I went down from the recommended 4 pills a day to one,
Mhm.
I think a couple months in, I had this like big, you know, emotional roller coaster, and I was like, maybe it's related to that. So I put myself back up, I think, to 2 a day or three,
Okay, yeah.
and it it helped. I think it made a really big difference.
Good. Good.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, sorry, I feel like I had a big, not a very good, not a very clear birth story that I shared. Sorry.
No, no, don't apologize. It was perfect. It was perfect. It was beautiful and I loved hearing it and yeah, it was great. So don't apologize. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Hmm. Is there anything else that you wanted to share about this, your pregnancy, birth journey, the experience that you have been on coming into first time motherhood?
Um, I don't know. I don't think so.
No, that's fine. That's totally okay.
Yeah.
And then just last question before we wrap up. So, and you don't have to if you don't want to, but if you wanted, is there a way that, say, a woman wanted to reach out to you to speak about your story? Did you want to leave like an Instagram page or contact details? And if not, I'm going to link anyways in the show notes, Gloria LeMay's doula course that you have taken. I've taken it as well, and it's fantastic. So I want to make sure that women that listen to this can find their way to her if they want to do this. And then I'll also link in Madison from Ode to Birth so that any women that are in the Vancouver lower mainland kind of area can reach out to her if they're wanting to support or get support in that way that you did from her.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to leave anything, you can do so now. And if not, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, my Instagram is Meghan, O'Brien,
Meghann
that
O'Brien.
one. I've got a little bit of writing around her birth
Hmm.
on there. My Facebook is just my name, Meghann O'Brien, but my name is spelled Meghann
Okay,
normally.
perfect.
Um, yeah, those, I guess, if anybody wanted to reach out in particular, I feel like I didn't quite share all of the things that the birth attendant we had hired, like the elder, who,
Mm.
because I really felt like I found what I was looking for in her from the moment that I met her. Like she came to the house and it was just this like little fairy, and I almost cried when I gave her a hug for the like when she came in and I just gave her a hug. And both my husband and I felt like she really
Mhm.
um understood things from a perspective that we were really looking for,
Mhm.
and filled a hole I felt like was really missing
Mhm.
in my journey. And I have a lot of trust in her. And yeah, if anybody wanted her contact or like a referral, I'd be happy to speak
Yeah,
more on that if anybody was interested. Because
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a different energy with traditional midwives, especially elder midwives that work in this way, that aren't aligned with the system and have that really deep knowing and trust of the women that they're supporting. It's, yeah, it's totally different. I've heard this from many women that have kind of been involved in the system with the licensed midwives, and then they do meet somebody that works outside of the system in a traditional way, and they just say it's like black and white, day and night. It's just so different, and you really do have your needs met, and you really do feel so supported. And like you said earlier in your story, um, because you were with the midwifery group that kind of rotated between the women that you could possibly know, but you wanted more of that one-to-one personal deeper connection. And yeah, it's so beautiful to create that with mothers. Like for myself, working as a practicing traditional midwifery, having that one-to-one is just so fruitful, and being able to really see these mothers grow in that way. So yeah, I could totally understand why it would be, kind of an emotional experience to have this woman come to your house and just be so open and so ready to support and serve and just be there for you and your partner in this beautiful journey.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And just I guess another thing, sorry, there are stuff I'd like to share, I guess, but
For
just
it.
that like, um, I guess just the disappointment that I felt with that midwifery care and the even some of the doula training. Like I think if there's any Indigenous woman listening, just like I would encourage, there's so much talk of like decolonizing, all sorts of things, like,
Mhm.
and kind of having Indigenous people come into birth spaces. And I think it's a bit of like a mistake in a way, like, and I want to be careful not to like talk crap or like crap on like anything anybody's doing, and they're doing a good thing and are trained and everything, but like us entering into those spaces and becoming registered midwives or like taking any other doula training than glorious. There's so much like I think bad information,
Mm.
or like a bad way of doing things that us participating in, and like a lot of Native mothers and mothers to be going in with trust because somebody's First Nations and they're a midwife. Like, I don't know that I believe participating in the system and thinking we're going to change it from the inside is really going to happen.
Mhm.
And just to encourage that, like, that questioning and that distrust that a lot of the First Nations people have about the medical system, like carry that into birth and like protect yourself and educate yourself and
Yes.
find good people working in the space, because there are good people and they're not always going to be First Nations, which
Mhm.
is where the trust comes in, where I'm going to trust you because you're like me,
Mhm.
because you're also Native. But they're kind of beholden to the system, like they're answerable to their boards of midwife boards or whatever, and
Mm,
they've got licenses that are all governed and dictated by our government, and that's where their kind of allegiance is. It
mhm.
has to be in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that because it's a big piece and it needs to be said. Yeah. So
Yeah.
for bringing that up. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing your story. I'm so grateful that I got to hear it, and I'm very excited to get it out there. Thank you, sisters, so much for listening to this episode of the Free Birthing in Color podcast. If you'd like to work with me one-on-one in a primal activation session, donate to the podcast, or to have your story featured here or in the blog, go to primalwomanportal.com for all the information to do so. Did you want to connect with our guest speaker? You can find all her information linked within the show notes. And if you have time, please subscribe, write a review, and tell a friend to have a listen so that this podcast and these stories of women birthing in their total power can be shared far and wide. Don't forget to check out the show notes for information on the Earth Daughters Women's Festival, the Breach Without Borders workshop, and much more. New episodes drop every Thursday morning, so stay tuned for the next amazing story to be shared on any platform that you prefer to listen to your podcasts on, or watch these episodes on the Free Birthing in Color YouTube page. And remember, your voice and your story matters. So if you're a woman of color or an Indigenous woman who's had a wild pregnancy and or birth outside of the medical system, submit your story because it's so important that your voice is heard and celebrated in your radical journey of pregnancy, birth, and motherhood.